So did you know the first colour film was actually made in 1908? It's a British film called A Visit to the Seaside. I think the kind of colours have a little bit to be desired. The process was like almost like a hand painted red, green and blue. Still quite cool for the time, like ridiculously cool. 30 years later, Technicolor comes along. Films like Wizard of Oz. This really revolutionised colour and the medium of film for using colour. It began to become so much more. Filmmakers want to push the boundaries of not just showing a bright world and how good the set design is. Filmmakers and directors quickly found another way to convey emotion and get the absolute most from a story. And using colour is just another one of those filmmaking tools which gets added to the process. It's the same way a camera angle can convey strength or weakness. Colour can convey happiness or sadness or any kind of emotion in between. So a couple of examples, like the red coat from Schindler's List, the block colour, kind of a throwback from old Hollywood from La La Land, and then the obviously blatant one is the Three Colours trilogy. Is he predominantly using each colour of the film's title? Colour can take different meanings, and each separate palette can heighten the cinematic experience in its own way. For me, colour has been almost a separate journey itself, along with my kind of filmmaking journey, from kind of simple steps of just using straight out camera profiles to possibly overdoing it. Quite happy to admit that. Now I'm almost using colour to kind of find my own style, to see what matches to my filmmaking and making it that way around. So I'm again going back to that emotion. If I can use everything I have to convey that emotion, then I'm on to an absolute winner. So why am I waffling on about colour? Most people are probably turned off by now. So how does that relate to me and other videographers, kind of like myself, who have a maybe one-man, two-man band type thing? So most of us are shooting a log profile. Fairly straightforward. It obviously looks like this. And then we do a colour correct, like this. And then we put on our favourite LUTs, like this. Maybe something else, yeah, that's better. So what we're trying to do is actually just emulate Hollywood, isn't it? We're trying to take our small budgets and make them look big budget. Fairly straightforward. So that's where we have to get a little bit clever. What do I mean by that? So you can just put on a LUT. There's plenty of apps which will add the grain and the LUTs and the colours, etc, etc, and maybe add a bit of noise and vignette and all that stuff I kind of talked about. But all it does, it just adds it over the top. But that is where a program called Dehancer comes in. So just to be clear, Dehancer did send me this to make this video, but I've actually had it before. You can download a free trial and have a look for yourself. If you do like it, then there's a link at the bottom if you do want to buy it from there. So if we come into DaVinci, you can see I have 4 clips here. I've tried to basically vary it just so we can kind of see what happens with it all. I won't go through it all 4 times, and I'm certainly not going to go through it in depth. I'm not a pro colorist. This is just kind of how I use it. So there may be a couple of things that are not quite right in there, and there may be a couple of things which you may think that's a load of rubbish. So if you want to put comments in below on that, really doesn't bother me at all. But this is how I use it from kind of start to finish. So this is kind of my basic node tree. This is how I kind of color every single one of my clips. First things first, we have obviously color space transform. If I just turn that on now, see if that changes it from the log profile, which is shot with the FX3. Dehancer is the next one along. As you can see on here, before I turn it on, it's basically I put the sources of X709 just so I can see exactly what I'm doing and exactly where I'm going to be as a finished product. Then a couple of basic tabs, again just playing with kind of shadows, things like that. Same with this next one on here, that's just kind of contrast, maybe the tint, maybe temperature, something like that. The parallel nodes here are for dodging and burning, and like I said before, colour space transform, Dehancer, and then this one is maybe sometimes a vignette. I generally do that afterwards. So let's kind of get into it. The first one I want to go into is actually print. So when you have a film, when you're recording a movie onto a film, you have your negative, this is your look you're going for, then you also have your print, which you print onto it afterwards. The print stock, one of the most famous ones, is the 2383, which is, just put that on and then we're just going to enable that. Again, that gives us a lot more contrast, and obviously this ever so slight kind of colour shift, but it just looks absolutely stunning. So after we've sorted that, now we can really think about what colours we really want in it. And for that we go to film. Film has all these in the, if we just enable that, anything from the Eternal, the Vivid, I see on here the Ilford, Kodaks, the Rolling on there, but what I want with this one is the Vision 3 500T. The reason I picked this one is, like I was saying before, it suits where we were filming and the actual shot kind of selection. It has this almost this kind of warmth to it. It doesn't have kind of ultra blacks and ultra whites. It's just really kind of almost homely, and that's kind of a look I was going for with this film. After we've sorted that, what I want to show you is output. The output basically controls how much of it is going to go on. From 0, which you will have no effects at all, to 100, so you can actually see what we're doing. Which is obviously quite nice if you want to dial it back a bit every now and again, or see how much it's going to kind of impact the overall. For now, I will keep it on 100. Generally, I have it about 60 to 70%, that kind of figure. So film developer is fairly straightforward. You have, oops, I just enable it, you have contrast, obviously your gamma, color separation, fairly straightforward things, but again, I don't need that at the moment. And the next one I'm kind of going to go on to is your film grain. Film grain is fairly straightforward. If I just enable that, and let me zoom in on here for you. As you can see the grain, you can go absolutely crazy with it, but I don't want that on at the moment. The next couple on here, one is halation. You might have heard of halation, but you're not quite sure exactly what it does. What it does, if I just turn up these right to the very, very max, it's the red channel off spill onto highlights, so you can see. I was actually going to point at the screen then, but you can't see where I'm pointing. You can see on here, and you can also see on his face. Very, very subtle if we use it, and it just gives that, again, what we're after, that film kind of feel. And the next one is bloom. As you can see on his kind of skin on here, we can just kind of have a bit of a play with that. You can amplify that to a point where it gets a bit weird, but again, subtlety is the key on here. So bloom is fairly straightforward. The next we got vignette, again, which is fairly straightforward as well. Gate weave is quite a good one. If I just enable that, you see how it just cropped in there. If I go out and go in again. Gate weave is when the film wasn't quite on the sprocket kind of properly, and it kind of moved about ever so slightly. Again, let me just turn these up a bit. And you'll see it just has a kind of a shift and a movement ever so slightly towards it. But again, we don't need that one for now. It does crop ever so slightly as well. We'll leave that one. And then monitor is fairly straightforward. We have false color. You can see where my kind of colors sit. This is where I was looking through here. This is the green. It's the most kind of important bit for me, and clipping indication as well. But again, I don't need any of them on. Like I said, there is output, and then the LUT generator. If you think you absolutely love those colors and you want output and you want to keep hold of it, which I've done with a couple of things now, you can do that and just export it as a LUT, which is absolutely fantastic, really easy. And instead of all this kind of thing, you don't have to put Dehancer in anymore. You can just add it to a node and add it to a LUT. Of course, it won't have quite the impact you want, because we don't really just want a LUT on top of it, especially with things like grain. The grain isn't just a LUT, it's actually looking at the film and the colour and the luminance and adding the grain to that properly. And then options at the bottom, fairly straightforward. And then if I wanted to add kind of vignettes, I'd probably do it here rather than here. So that, we can see from very, very quickly, hardly going through any of them, to be honest. There is our kind of colour difference. And if I turn that one off as well, obviously from log, colour space transform to Dehancer, very, very quickly we just kind of ran through that, and we've made a massive, massive difference. It's probably a little bit too heavy on the colour grading, but then if we go through the next ones, so there we go. There's 4 different types of video, going through Dehancer very, very, very quickly, and only really going through the kind of the basic modes. There is a lot more to it, and there's a lot of depth you can really, really go into. But for this kind of tutorial, as it were, I've just kind of skimmed the surface. I hope you really enjoyed that. If there is any questions at all, I'll try my best to answer them. Like I said, I'm not a pro colorist by any chance. I'm certainly wouldn't call myself an expert in this field, but I almost wanted to show you how easy it was to take your footage into Dehancer and how easy it was to use the software. Like I said, any comments, please put them down below, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But until next time, which will be another Dehancer video, but actually on the Lightroom and Photoshop side of it, which is going to be really interesting. We'll see you then. Cheers.